Most people look at the Simca 1000 and see only a small, square, unremarkable French economy car. Something simple. Something forgettable. But history has a strange way of hiding character in plain sight. Because this little sedan, produced between 1961 and 1978, was anything but ordinary. Over 1.6 million units were built, it became a common sight across France and parts of Europe, and for many families it was their first step into car ownership. Yet behind its modest shape lies a story of Italian origins, American corporate control, unexpected motorsport success, and engineering choices that quietly defied the trends of its time. And once you understand what this car really was, you stop seeing it as just transportation. Let's begin with something most people never realize. The Simca 1000 was not born purely in France. Its roots trace back to Italy, to Fiat engineering work from the late 1950s. Simca, a French automaker at the time, developed the 1000 based on a Fiat project that had been shelved before full development in Italy. Simca refined it, adapted it, and turned it into something that would define its own identity on French roads. But here is the surprising part. This wasn't just a case of borrowing an idea. It became a transformation. A design that started in Italy was reshaped by French industrial needs, French roads, and French driving culture. The result was a car that belonged fully to neither country, yet ended up representing everyday French life for nearly 2 decades. For drivers at the time, none of this mattered. What mattered was simple. It was affordable, practical, and ready to drive. But behind that simplicity was a quiet story of European automotive exchange long before globalization made it normal. Now imagine a small family car from the early 1960s, and you expect the engine to be in the front. That's what most buyers expected too. But the Simca 1000 surprised them. It placed its engine in the rear. Today, that might sound unusual, but at the time it was a calculated engineering decision. Why would engineers do this? The goal was space efficiency. By moving the engine to the back, the front of the car could be shortened, making the car easier to park in tight European streets while still offering usable cabin space. Families needed compact cars that didn't feel cramped, and this layout helped achieve that balance. But here is what most drivers discovered after living with it. The rear engine layout gave the car a very specific driving personality. The rear wheels carried more weight, which improved traction in everyday conditions like wet roads or uneven rural streets. At low speeds, it felt light and easy to maneuver, almost playful in character. For many owners, especially first-time drivers, it made the Simca 1000 feel more alive than its price tag suggested. What most people never realized at the time was that this layout was already starting to fade from mainstream European design. By the late 1960s, manufacturers were moving toward front-engine, front-wheel drive cars for better stability and safety. Yet Simca continued with its rear-engine formula for years. Not because it was outdated, but because it still worked for its purpose: cheap, reliable mobility. And that leads to another overlooked truth. The Simca 1000 survived not because it chased innovation, but because it prioritized affordability and simplicity. While other manufacturers experimented with complex new layouts, Simca focused on keeping production costs low and reliability high. In a rapidly changing automotive world, that decision kept the car alive far longer than many expected. Then something unexpected happened. A small, practical family sedan developed a second life, on the racetrack. At first glance, the Simca 1000 and motorsport do not belong in the same sentence. But enthusiasts saw potential in its lightweight body and rear-engine balance. The turning point came with the Simca 1000 rally versions in the early 1970s, which transformed the car's image completely. The rally models were not luxury sports cars. They were stripped, tuned, and made more aggressive in character. Engineers improved engine output and sharpened handling. The result was a small car that could surprise much larger and more powerful vehicles in tight, technical racing conditions. The reason this mattered so much is simple. Motorsport in that era was not just about professional racing teams. It was also about accessibility. Young drivers and amateurs could enter club racing events, and the Simca 1000 became one of the most affordable ways to do it. Suddenly, this ordinary car became a training ground for performance driving skills. Imagine watching one of these small sedans sliding through corners in a rallycross event. It didn't look powerful, but it was light, responsive, and unpredictable in the right hands. That combination created a loyal following that still exists among classic motorsport enthusiasts today. But there is another layer to this story that often gets overlooked. In 1963, Simca became increasingly influenced by Chrysler, the American automotive giant. Over time, Chrysler gained controlling interest in the company, and Simca became part of what was later known as Chrysler Europe. This introduced a quiet but important shift. A French car with Italian roots was now partially under American corporate direction. Design decisions, production strategies, and long-term planning were influenced by a global network of automotive thinking. Yet despite this, the Simca 1000 retained its core identity. It remained simple, compact, and focused on everyday drivers. Countless families, it was their first real step into car ownership. Yet behind its simple bodywork lies a story shaped by Fiat engineering roots, Chrysler corporate control, rear-engine innovation, unexpected motorsport energy, and a long life that outlasted the design trends that eventually replaced it. Most people still remember the Simca 1000 as a small, almost ordinary French economy car. A simple square shape. Basic engineering. Nothing that would make you stop and stare. But history has a habit of hiding extraordinary stories inside the most ordinary machines. Because between 1961 and 1978, this modest sedan quietly became one of the most interesting European cars of its time. More than 1.6 million units were built. It filled city streets across France, Spain, and other parts of Europe, and for countless families it was their first real step into car ownership. Yet behind its simple bodywork lies a story shaped by Fiat engineering roots, Chrysler corporate control, rear-engine innovation, unexpected motorsport energy, and a long life that outlasted the design trends that eventually replaced it. And once you understand this car properly, it stops being just a small French sedan and starts feeling like a snapshot of an entire automotive era. Let's start with something most people never realize. The Simca 1000 was not born fully French. Its origins go back to Italy, to Fiat engineering work from the late 1950s. At that time, Fiat had been developing a compact car concept under internal projects that focused on simple construction and rear-engine layout ideas. One of these projects was never fully carried forward in Italy, but the design concept did not disappear. Simca, which was then operating in France but still closely linked with Fiat, adopted and adapted this idea. But here is what makes it interesting. The Simca 1000 was not a simple copy. It was a transformation. French engineers reshaped it for French roads, French driving conditions, and French manufacturing realities. So in a way, the car became a hybrid identity before globalization even became a common word. Italian roots, French execution, and later American corporate influence. Very few everyday cars carry such a layered history. And yet, for the average buyer in 1961, none of that mattered. They were not buying international history. They were buying affordable mobility. A car that could carry a family, handle city traffic, and remain within reach of middle-class budgets. Now here comes another surprising decision that defined the Simca 1000's character completely. Instead of placing the engine in the front like most cars of its time, Simca placed it in the rear. At first, this sounds unusual. But in the early 1960s, this was still a practical engineering solution. By moving the engine to the back, engineers could free up space in the front, reduce the length of the car, and make it easier to drive in narrow European streets. Cities in France were not designed for large vehicles. Parking was tight, roads were compact, and efficiency mattered more than luxury. So the Simca 1000 became small on the outside but surprisingly usable on the inside. That was the goal. Practicality above everything. But what drivers discovered after owning it was something more emotional. The rear-engine layout gave the car a very specific personality. The rear wheels carried more weight, which improved traction in everyday driving conditions like wet roads or uneven surfaces. The car felt light, responsive, and almost playful at low speeds. Imagine driving through a quiet French town in the 1960s. Narrow streets, stone buildings, soft engine noise behind you. The Simca 1000 didn't feel powerful, but it felt alive in a very simple, honest way. But here is the part that most people never think about. That same rear-engine design also made the car behave differently when pushed too hard. In certain conditions, especially at higher speeds, the weight balance could make it more sensitive in corners. It required respect, like many rear-engine cars of that era. Drivers who understood it well often described it as characterful, while inexperienced drivers sometimes found it less forgiving. This dual personality is exactly what gave the Simca 1000 its identity. Easy and friendly in daily life, but demanding attention when driven aggressively. As the 1960s moved forward, the automotive world started changing rapidly. Front-wheel drive cars began to appear more often, offering better space efficiency and more predictable handling. Simca itself would later move in that direction with newer models like the Simca 1100. But the Simca 1000 remained in production. Why? Because sometimes the simplest solution is also the most profitable. The design was already developed, factories were already producing it, and most importantly, people were still buying it. For many families, it remained one of the cheapest ways to own a brand new car. So while the industry was evolving, the Simca 1000 quietly continued doing its job. Then something unexpected happened that changed the car's reputation completely. A basic family sedan entered the world of motorsport. At first, this sounds almost impossible. A small economy car competing in racing environments. But enthusiasts in the 1960s and early 1970s saw something different. They saw a lightweight chassis, a simple mechanical structure, and a rear-engine balance that could be useful in tight racing conditions. This led to the development of performance-focused versions, most famously the Simca 1000 rally models. These were not luxury sports cars. They were stripped down, tuned, and sharpened for performance driving. More power, less weight, and a much more aggressive character. And suddenly, the image of the Simca 1000 changed. It was no longer just a family car. It became a machine that could participate in amateur racing, rally events, and club motorsport scenes across Europe. Imagine a small square sedan sliding through corners on a dusty rally stage, engine buzzing behind the driver, competing against more expensive and more powerful machines. That contrast is exactly what made it memorable. For many young drivers, the Simca 1000 became their entry point into motorsport culture. Not because it was the fastest, but because it was accessible, affordable, fixable, understandable. And that accessibility created a generation of enthusiasts who learned driving skills in a car that demanded both respect and creativity. Now let's add another layer to its story. In 1963, Simca became increasingly influenced by Chrysler, the American automotive giant. Over time, Chrysler took controlling interest, and Simca became part of Chrysler Europe. This meant the Simca 1000 was now indirectly connected to three automotive cultures: Italian engineering roots, French production identity, and American corporate ownership. But interestingly, this global influence did not dramatically change the car's core personality. It remained simple, compact, and focused on affordability. That is one of the most fascinating things about it. Even under corporate shifts, the product stayed true to its original purpose. For everyday owners, this entire corporate story was invisible. They were not thinking about Fiat or Chrysler. They were thinking about fuel, maintenance, and whether the car would start in the morning. And in most cases, it did exactly what it was supposed to do. As production continued through the 1970s, the Simca 1000 slowly began to look outdated compared to newer designs. Cars were becoming safer, more aerodynamic, and more modern in layout. Yet the Simca stayed relevant because it was already deeply established in the market. It had one advantage that new designs could not easily replace: trust. Millions of drivers already knew it, mechanics understood it, and spare parts were widely available. That kind of ecosystem keeps a car alive far longer than styling trends. By the time production ended in 1978, the automotive world had moved on. But the Simca 1000 left behind something more important than just production numbers. It left behind memories. For some people, it was their first car. For others, it was a family car that carried them through childhood. For young enthusiasts, it was a training ground for learning how cars really behave. And that is why today, when you see a surviving Simca 1000, it does not feel like a forgotten economy car. It feels like a time capsule from an era when driving was simpler, ownership was personal, and every car had a distinct mechanical personality. It may never have been a luxury icon or a performance legend in the traditional sense. But it did something far more meaningful. It became part of everyday life for millions of people. And sometimes, that is the most important legacy a car can leave behind. Did you ever see a Simca 1000 on the road, or know someone who owned one back in the day? Share your memory in the comments. Because stories like these are what keep automotive history alive.